So this is catching up with a post I put on my community a little while back, and I asked my subscribers and viewers of my community if you wanted me to do a video giving you a little bit of rundown on what type of computer to use for essentially turn into a retro console system. So what I've done is I'm going to break this down into two parts, and this part is going to be looking at kind of a lower end emulation machine, which will run everything up until around the PS1 era. So around the mid 90s, and for my next video, I'm going to be looking at kind of the late 90s to 2000s and beyond, which is obviously going to be higher spec machines. So in this video, I'm going to take you through some websites and I'm going to attempt to get you the best value for money. And I've got some really good ideas for this. So check this video out. Okay then, so if you like this video today, just hit notifications for me and subscribe. I'm always uploading emulation content. I've got plenty at this point. So the first port of call is going to be eBay. And the reason I say eBay is that there's a lot of ex-office machines on eBay. Now, the ones I recommend is things like Dell Optiplex. And you can get i5 6500 processors. They generally got around 8 GB of RAM. So for people who's not too sure about hardware, the 8 GB of RAM is pretty substantial for running anything up until the PSX or PS1 era. And we're also looking at hard drives on this. So the 240 SSD is kind of like an upgrade from the traditional mechanic hard drive. So if you're looking for a cheap machine, you normally find these days that the solid state drives, which is known as SSDs, are not too much really. So let's take a look at this Dell Optiplex 3040. So here we go. So this is quite a capable machine of performing what I intend it to perform. If this is what you're after to run games up until the PS1 era, this should be just fine. So if we take a look at the back of this, we've actually got HDMI port on this, and it could be a D port. So a D port is kind of like an odd mixture of HDMI and a kind of weird ending on it, but you can actually buy these HDMI and D port cables from Amazon for a few pounds. The good thing about this is actually got Ethernet on it, and if you can see, it's got 4 USB ports. So say you want a 4-player game and you're planning on running something like Batocera on this or retrobat, then we've got 4 USB ports in the front, and you've also got a couple of ports in the back. And by the looks of it, these are USB 3 ports as they're blue. So that's going to be a fast transfer. Now, strangely enough, when I look at the system specifics on this, it's actually running Windows 11, and to my knowledge, this processor isn't technically or officially supposed to be running Windows 11. So I would probably get rid of Windows 11 on this and likely put Batocera on it as its own operating system. So as I was saying, under connectivity, we got standard HDMI, we got USB 2, and like I said just a minute ago, it's got USB 3. So USB 3, if you're planning to transfer games from hard drive, then simply plug it into the USB 3 ports. That's going to make things a lot quicker for you. And as I was also saying, it's also got DisplayPort on it too. Now, in terms of graphics with this machine, we've got integrated onboard graphics. So it doesn't actually have a dedicated graphics card or GPU, but it's going to be running straight from the motherboard. So sometimes for lower end systems such as PlayStation 1, this should be quite sufficient in performance. Anything running up until the PS1 era isn't going to be too demanding. And actually, the memory on this machine has actually got DDR3. So obviously, we look at this as a numbers game. The more DDR you got, say that was DDR4, the faster performance is going to be. So just remember that RAM, or also known as memory, is there to speed things up, your processors up. And further looking down on this, we've also got VGA. So if you're planning on setting up arcade machine and you're looking at using an old school monitor which only supports VGA, then this one's going to be a good option because it's got VGA on it. So VGA connection, the resolutions aren't going to be as good as HDMI, but that option is there. And if we look at the processor speed on this one's running at 3.20 gigahertz or 3.2 gigahertz. So it's pretty fast really for what it is. And this is why I'm recommending an X Office machine because it benefits really well when playing retro games on these if it's set up correctly. And talking about the processor, as we can see here, this is a quad core. So essentially, there's four processors running on this processor. So quad equals 4, and obviously the processor speed is running at 3.2 gigahertz. So it's a very fast machine then for those older games up until the end of the, say, the PlayStation era. And it's also worth taking a look at CEX. And obviously, this video was really looking at cheaper computer office type systems from UK. Obviously, prices in different parts of the world are going to be a little bit different to the UK. But one thing about CEX is that they do test their products, and I've never particularly had any bad experiences buying from CX in the past, although I know some people do. But generally, probably, yeah, 100% of the time I've ever really bought from CX, I've always had a good experience. But if you're looking for a cheaper computer to flash with something like batocera or run retrobat on, then CEX is also a good place. And they only charge a few pounds for delivery. And I think most cases it's the next day or a couple of days after you put your order in. So around the 50 to £70 mark, that's what I'm aiming towards. This we've seen just now with the i5 6500 on eBay. You're roughly going to get around the same performance on CEX with the machines they're selling of the same price. So if we just click onto this one on CEX, this one is another X Office computer by the seams of it. This is an Elite Desk. Now this one's actually running Windows 10, so that's perfect if you want to be running retrobat simultaneously. Whereas if you want batocera, then you would obviously need to wipe Windows 10 to make it a dedicated system. This one's also coming with DDR3, which isn't a big problem, and it's got a 500 gigabyte hard drive. So I'm guessing this is the old style mechanical hard drive. It says HDD, and they could be noisy. And to be fair, those old style hard drives are getting pretty old nowadays, and they're getting slower, which is why I would likely suggest getting the SSD, the solid state drive, over an old style hard drive. Okay, and for those of you out there who wants to also upgrade something like the i5 6500 eBay PC I was just talking about, I recommend grabbing a cheap GeForce GT card. So again, CEX is a good place to get these from. They're thoroughly tested. And if it doesn't work, they will test it themselves and give you a refund or swap it over with another model. So as we can see, these GeForce GT graphics cards, they're pretty cheap, and just by spending an extra, say, 10 to £20, it's going to give you that extra boost. If we take a look at these, for those who are unfamiliar with how graphics cards work, you'll see some of these say 512 megabyte and some say 1 gigabyte. So what that is something called VRAM, that's video RAM. So obviously the more RAM you've got on your graphics cards, the better quality your games are going to become. So if you want to sort of go up towards the PlayStation 2 era, if you pair one of these, especially a 1 gigabyte GeForce GT card, or even a 2 gigabyte, here we go, 9800 GT 2 gigabyte, they sell for £12. If you was to pair this one with that eBay computer I was just showing you, you would get a very good performance or a fair performance with one of these cards. And if you want to spend a bit more, the GTX range are also very good. And again, the RAM, the VRAM rather, that these come with, are literally the same as the GT. So obviously the more RAM, the more video, or VRAM as it's known as, it's got, the better. And also bear in mind, some games work with drivers. So OpenGL you might be familiar with, or even Vulkan. And without one of these graphics cards, some of those higher end systems such as PlayStation 2 are going to run very sluggish. So without a doubt, if you want a cheap solution and you want to play some PlayStation 2 games and Dreamcast games, just bear in mind these aren't going to give you a full 4K resolution with upscale graphics. You know, you're going to get the basic of the basics. But for those that don't mind a small resolution rather than 4K or 2K resolution, then, you know, one of these cards here, a GT or a GTX with, I don't know, 1 GB to 2 GB of RAM, you know, that's going to suffice. They're going to be very good for giving you a fairly good performance. But before you buy one of these, just make sure, if you buy one of these cards with the PC that I recommended, the i5 6500, just make sure that there's enough space inside of the computer. If you was to buy something very bulky like this, just bear in mind that the PC case are fairly small inside, so you're likely going to be looking at something a lot smaller. So smaller doesn't always necessarily mean that it's worse than a bigger one, dare I say it. So sometimes smaller is better, dare I say it. But I'm not going to go into that. But what you need to be doing is looking at the specs and the VRAM. And what I recommend doing next is actually comparing the graphics cards with the CPU. So, for example, I'm going to just copy and paste this NVIDIA GeForce 710 GT card. I'm going to copy this, go to Google, and if I just type this into Google, I'm going to put versus i5 6500, and this should give us some information here if this is a good mixture. So, you know, some graphics cards are going to bottleneck, what's called bottlenecking, not going to give you a good performance. So, generally, if you put this type of thing into Google, you'll get the information here if this is a good pair. And as we can see there, it says this configuration has 41.1% of graphic cards bottleneck. And whilst we're on CEX, I just thought to myself, let's take a look at what Raspberry Pi has to offer. So I remember quite some time ago when somebody told me about Raspberry Pi, and at the time it was quite a new thing. And he told me it would be a credit card sized computer, and my mind was blown at the time. This is probably going back 15, 16 years ago. But yeah, it came out. So nowadays we've got different models and different variants of Raspberry Pi. So to my knowledge, the latest Raspberry Pi is actually the Raspberry Pi 4. And I'm pretty sure the max RAM you can get in one of these is 8 GB. So I know a lot of people swear on Raspberry Pis, but from experience in the past, I just seem to think they are underpowered. And of course, they don't have much in terms of cooling. You can put expansions on them, such as fans, that type of thing, but at the end of the day, you can't attach a graphics card to it as such. Everything is integrated with a Raspberry Pi. So, in terms of playing up to PlayStation 1, yes, you're looking at something like a Model B Plus, I believe, a Raspberry Pi 3, sorry, and a Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 GB of RAM is also going to support that. But generally, I'm saying for a more sturdy performance, I would likely suggest going for a desktop PC rather than a Raspberry Pi. I think the only thing Raspberry Pi has got going for it is the size of it. So if you want something really small and perhaps you want it to be on your TV, so it's out the way, then a Raspberry Pi is probably your best bet. And whilst I'm talking about credit card size computers, I'm also going to show you Odroid. So Odroid is a very good, in fact, possibly, I would say, possibly better performance-wise than a Raspberry Pi. Although largely Odroids are really underrated, I think, and they got better processors and they just seem to support games a lot more easier than the Raspberry Pis. So I experimented with the XU4 several years back now, and I found the performance, even playing some Dreamcast games on the XU4, was really good. The N2 Plus, I think there's a couple of different variants of that, and if you go over to the Odroid website, which is at ojoys.co.uk. I'm going to leave the links in my description. You can buy these with actual cards fitted into them, which have got software on them, or you can just buy these by themselves and do them yourself. And as you just seen on the screen just here, with I think it's the Odroid XU4, you can actually buy an Odroid N64 style case to go with it. So there's some really good stuff to look at on the Odroid website for budget gaming. So if we take a look under Odroid boards, we're going to get back to the XU4. And this is the one I recommend. If you should go for a smaller size, almost credit card size computer, I would definitely recommend an Odroid by far over a Raspberry Pi. Now, for example, I think this one's a really good buy. For the power this one produces, we've got different options here to buy this with. We can have a 256 gigabyte memory card with it, 128 gigabyte memory cards, and these are all pretty much micro SD cards. So, they're going to be SD cards, of course, and sometimes they might corrupt if you plan on deleting things and reinstalling operating systems. SD cards, micro SD cards, don't last forever, so just be aware of that. And if you should buy an Odroid, you've also got the option to get this supplied with a power supply and even a case to go with it. Obviously, this is going to be a bit more expensive, but under cases, you have option of a black case, a clear case, and there's some good stuff on there. And whilst we're on Odroid, I'm also going to show you the N2 Plus. So I'm pretty sure at this point something has surpassed the N2 Plus, but up until a couple of years ago, the N2 Plus was another upgrade on the XU4. So we got a couple of different variations of this one. We've got a 2 gigabyte model of RAM, that is, and a 4 gigabyte model with RAM. And yeah, they're a bit more expensive, with tax included, £108, but it's going over the budget of £100. But if you're prepared to pay that little bit extra, then Odroid N2 Plus with 4 gigabyte RAM is really going to give you a good performance. And just like the XU4 version model, that is, we also got options here to put a case on this thing, a transparent clear case, and we also get this supplied with a power adapter if that's what you wanted. So on the website, we've even got benchmarks just here. And if we just take a look at the benchmarks on here, we can see that the Odroid N2 Plus and the Odroid N2 Plus just here. Bear in mind, both of these are the same. This one's with turbo mode enabled. These two N2 Plus models, as you can see, can easily beat the speed of Raspberry Pi 4, which are in the blue columns just here. And I'm going to quickly show something else whilst I'm on the Odroid website. They also do a range of handheld systems. We got the Odroid Go Advanced Super, and you can put systems on there like Batocera, and I'm pretty sure Recalbox will also go onto one of these, and they're fairly good. So that's worth taking a look at. So personally, if I was to look for building a cheap retro system to play up to PlayStation 1 and quite possibly some Dreamcast, I would go for one of these. And like I say, this doesn't come with a graphics card. It's got integrated graphics on the motherboard, which isn't bad. They actually give a good performance. And just bear in mind that, say, PlayStation 1 hardware technology is 90s technology. So this one is capable enough, and it's also going to sit inside of an arcade system if that's what you want to do. On this one, we've also got Windows 11, which it shouldn't be on there, but it's not a problem because if you want to put Batocera on this, then it's just a case of deleting Windows 11 and reflashing it with Batocera. Having said that, if you want to put retrobat on here and you want Windows 10, then you just downgrade back to Windows 10. As simple as that. And you've also got the 4 USB ports on this one. You've got VGA, you've got HDMI, and you've got DisplayPort. So there's multiple options just there to put this onto a screen, on different screens rather. And we've even got a disk drive here, so you can pop your games inside and use them and rip them for use with your emulators. And for a credit card size system, then without a doubt, if you're prepared to spend over £100, just over £120, say, with tax included, and a case to go with one of these with a power supply, I would definitely recommend the N2 Plus with 4 GB of RAM in case. It's a very good buy and it's very discreet and highly hide beyond your TV. We've also got 4 USB 3 ports on the 2 Plus as well, and an Ethernet cable and HDMI. So it's a very good buy and a very cheap solution for retro gaming. And I'm going to quickly wrap up this video, and I'm going to say to people out there buying one of these older office type computers is to avoid buying from pawn shops such as cash converters. I've visited a few cash converters in the past, and literally just one of them was actually decent enough to clean up their products they're selling and actually seem to test their products they're selling. Now, I think sometimes in life there's a reason why someone gets a lot of bad publicity, and cash converters, without a doubt, is one of those reasons. My local cash converters stock kind of looks like it's just been pulled out of a skip. Literally, I don't buy from this local branch anymore because I found I was just wasting money. And when push comes to the shove, they promise money back or whatever. They won't give you your money back. They will argue that you've broken it and all that, and you don't want that headache. And that's why I say to avoid pawnbrokers, place type like cash converters, and take your money elsewhere. It really isn't worth the hassle. And let's face it, cash converter staff are kind of jack of all trades people. They're not really specifically trained in specifically computers, whereas a company like CEX more likely would be. To me, CEX staff, they're decent people. They clean their products, probably 100% in my case of the time, and they actually care about what they sell, whereas cash converters are literally in it for a quick buck to earn. So, without a doubt, and if you are a cash converter staff watching this, this is my opinion, and my opinion is avoid cash converters and just go elsewhere. So that's it today for my recommendations for cheap systems to get retrobat, Recalbox, batocera, or even Launchbox up and running with. I'm going to upload a second part of this at some point, but not anytime soon. I'm too busy with emulation videos these days. But in my next part of this video, I'm going to be looking at higher end systems to get machines or systems like PlayStation 3, Wii, GameCube running. And just bear in mind, these systems or computers I've showed you today are very unlikely to go to PS3 in terms of emulation. They're just simply too underpowered for those systems. So I hope I helped somebody today with this little explanation. And if you're interested in learning more about front ends, I also uploaded a video a while back on comparing modern day front end retro emulator systems. So until next time, stay retro.